Hello students, welcome to Studying with Students again. I am very happy you are liking, subscribing and commenting my channel. Keep watching the channel till last of the video and you will get more information about the exam and exam point of view. I will give some key points or keynotes. Keep watching. So we will start today the Unit 1 MEG 6 American Literature, the Puritan Context. Okay, so what is the Puritan Context? We will discuss in brief. So Unit 1 I will cover today. So here is the structure. What are the structures? Objectives, introduction, the prehistory of the Puritan presence in New England. Who were the New England Puritans? The New England Puritans as they saw themselves and their mission in America. The emergence of Puritanism as the hegemonic American ideology. Let us sum up, then questions, then suggested readings. I will cover all these things. You will see the objectives. Here you will see the objectives, introduction, the history of the Puritan presence in New England, the New England Puritans, who were they, and the New England Puritans as they saw themselves and their mission in America because they saw themselves as the God's person. The emergence of Puritanism as the hegemonic American ideology. So what is hegemonic American ideology? All I will discuss here. Then let us sum of questions and suggested readings. Okay. So we will start the objectives of Unit 1, that is the Puritan Context. Okay. So what is Puritan Context? In this unit, I shall throw light upon the context of the Puritan migration from the old world to the new world and the emergence of a new American culture and literature. Okay, so it is a new American culture and literature. Previously, it was from England culture and their literature. Along with information about the New England Puritans, I shall also present a range of extracts from the writings of these Puritans about themselves and their mission in America. So what is Puritan concept and how Puritans think about themselves? Okay, so the Puritans thought that they and they alone were the founders of American civilization. So Puritans always thought that they are the only founders of American civilization. Okay, they are the only founder of American civilization. This thought was Puritan's thought, and not only the inhabitants of territory before or after. They thought that they are the only one and only founders of American civilization. Before them, not the inhabitants of territory before or after. Gradually over the centuries, people accepted the Puritan view as the dominant view of American history. Then introduction, the prehistory of the Puritan presence in New England. So what is the prehistory of the Puritan presence in New England? The Puritans were certainly not the first inhabitants, not even the first settlers from Europe in the American continent. Okay, so Puritans not only the first inhabitants, but they thought that they are the first inhabitants. Okay, as you are aware, many a voice of exploration and discovery, starting with that of the Italian sailor Cristoforo Colombo. Okay, Cristoforo Colombo, better known as Christopher Columbus, in 1491 found its way by accident or intention to the source of what was later to be called America. So after Christopher Columbus, the name was America. They invented America, okay, in 1491. So here 1491 and Christopher Columbus is the main point, who found America by accident or intention, okay, to the source of America. Then these voyages extended for over a Englishman. Okay, these voyages extended for over a century, but till the 1580s, none of them, also records suggest, were manned by Englishmen. Englishmen were resolutely engrossed in their inheritance, in their internecine conflicts through these decades. Okay, Englishmen were resolutely engrossed in their internecine conflicts. Okay, Englishmen were resolutely engrossed in their internecine conflicts through these decades, and it was as late 1584 that Sir Walter Raleigh dispatched an English ship to investigate if it was possible to colonize other lands. So, who did dispatch an English ship to investigate if it was possible to colonize other lands? So, Sir Walter Raleigh. Okay, so Sir Walter Raleigh in 1584. Okay, Sir Walter Raleigh. Walter Raleigh. Okay, Walter Raleigh, an English ship to investigate it was possible or not to colonize other lands. Their main intention was to colonize other lands. In 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh dispatched an English ship. Okay. Another attempt took off in 1606, and in this instance, the energetic intruders decided to establish a settlement in Jamestown, Virginia, named after their Virgin Queen. Okay. So, in 1606, the energetic intruders decided to establish a settlement in Jamestown, Virginia. So, Virginia named after the Virgin Queen. So, the name of the Virginia is about the Virgin Queen at that time. The settlement, however, suffered from many disasters. Okay, so settlements, however, suffered from many disasters because the British men were intruders to the American colony. Homesickness, epidemics, deaths, the list of troubles encountered by the earliest English settlers in America were many. Okay, so what are the current what are their environment at that time? Okay, so their environment was basically of homesickness, epidemics, and deaths. So it's not a good environment. The Chesapeakes. Okay, the Chesapeakes. The Red Indians of the region, instigated by their illustrious leader Powhatan, resented the coming of the outsiders. The Chesapeakes, the Red Indians of the region. So, their inhabitants, mostly of Red Indians, the Chesapeakes, instigated by their illustrious leader Powhatan. So, who was the leader of that time? Powhatan was the leader of that time. Powhatan was the leader of Red Indians. Okay, leader Powhatan then resented the coming of the outsiders. They thought that English is not organizing any agricultural activities. They thought that the English in not organizing any agricultural activities on English lands. So, needlessly exploited their resources and exertions. So, Powhatan first thought that the English in not organizing any agricultural activities on English lands needlessly exploited their resources and exertions. So, who thought that? Powhatan, the leader of Red Indians and Chesapeakes. Okay, skirmishes ensued soon. Okay, skirmishes ensued soon. The English were especially savage in their assaults, especially because they are extremely dependent upon these people. Okay, so skirmishes ensued soon. Skirmishes means the mishappening ensued soon. The English were especially savage in their assaults. The English were especially savage in their assaults, especially because they are extremely dependent upon these people. So, Englishmen were extremely dependent upon these Red Indians of the America, whom they despised and therefore determined to demonstrate an absolute superiority over them. So, the Englishmen determined to demonstrate an absolute superiority over them. They treat Red Indians as inferior to them. In order to punish a haughty tribe, the English would resort to mass massacre of its members. In order to punish a haughty tribe. So, the American colonies were of haughty tribe. So the English would resort to mass massacre. Mass massacre means they create a death of more members of their colonies. Okay, so it is called mass massacre of its members. Okay, so mass massacre or mass murder. Okay, mass massacre or mass murder the English people created in American society. So that is the context of American literature. Here is the North America, Atlantic Ocean. So I will show you the map. So here North America. Okay, so here North America, then Atlantic Ocean, Spain, France, England. So these are the neighboring countries. And here Columbus 1492, then Columbus 1493, Columbus 1502, then Pacific Oceans and South America. Okay, North America and South America. So European explorations in America. Englishmen had a tendency to wander off to stay with the relatively affluent Indians. Okay, Englishmen had a tendency to wander off to stay with the relatively affluent Indians. So Englishmen need to stay with the relatively affluent Indians with their organized and abundant food supplies or to trade with them. So what was the reason behind this? Because Englishmen preferred their organized and abundant food supplies of these red Indians and want to trade with them, trade or business. Their motive was business and to do trade with them. The Jamestown authorities burnt, flared and killed their own people. Okay, the Jamestown authorities burnt. Then what was the happening at that time? The Jamestown authorities burnt, flayed and killed their own people. Meanwhile, thousands of settlers died from starvation and illness. Okay, so the Jamestown authorities burnt. Okay, Jamestown authorities burnt, fled and killed their own people. They fled and killed their own people. Means many people were dying at that time by their own people. Okay. Meanwhile, thousands of settlers died from starvation and illnesses. To save the declining Virginia statement, the Virginia Company, which had sponsored the settlement in the first place, soon realized that the colonists had to be given a personal interest in what they were doing. Okay, soon realized that the colonists had to be given a personal interest in what they were doing. They would not work hard to realize food for the company itself. The power of individual enterprise had to be put to work. In return for a small annual quit rent, settlers were allowed to take up sizable tracts of land to farm for themselves. Okay, at that time, that situation of agricultural land was described here. The time of hardships was soon at an end. Then in 1619, a legislative body allowed the Virginia settlers to own and cultivate the land, which transferred them from unimportant employees of an old company to significant citizens of a new country. Okay, so which transferred from them unimportant employees of an old company to significant citizens of a new country. The tobacco crop planted experimentally in 1612 yielded such high profits from London that by 1620 an amazing gold rush was underway for tobacco land. The tobacco crop planted experimentally in 1612 yielded such high profits from London that by 1620 an amazing gold rush was underway for tobacco land. So here at that time 1612 the tobacco land was also in a very good business trades products. The tobacco crop planted experimentally in 1612 yielded such high profits. At last Virginia appeared to be evolving into a prosperous settlement. Okay, so Previously, I have told Virginia, the city named after the Queen, Virgin Queen, that is Virginia. The Virginia appeared to be evolving into a prosperous settlement of north towards the eastern edge of the American continent. In the meanwhile, the first Puritan fleet, transporting its 400 devout souls, sailed around the tip of the Cape Cod and stationed itself finally at the Plymouth Harbor of Massachusetts Bay. Okay, so it's a important statements of north towards the eastern edge of the American continent. In the meanwhile, the first Puritan flight. So when was the first Puritan flight and how was it? The first Puritan flight, transporting its 400 devout souls, sailed around the tip of the Cape Cod and stationed itself finally at the Plymouth Harbor of Massachusetts Bay. Then the first settlers who came to Massachusetts thus in 1620 to found a dedicated community were the Pilgrims. So first Pilgrims in 1620 came to Massachusetts. Okay, so see Massachusetts. See here Massachusetts in 1620 dedicated community were the Pilgrims. Okay, so you will remember these points. Fleeing from the hardened depravities of the old world to the new world, they established their homesteads in an obscure stage close to Plymouth. 10 years later came the Great Puritan migration from England, followed by an astonishingly numerous rabble bringing thousands of settlers, the largest single expedition of English people in the 17th century. Puritan settlements sprang up at Rochester, Boston, Watertown, Roxbury, Mystic, and Lynn. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was now fully launched. Okay, so Puritan settlements, where were the Puritan settlements? That is, Puritan settlements sprang up to Rochester, Boston, Watertown, Roxbury, Mystic, and Lynn. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was now fully launched. So you people just remember this place. Place Puritan settlements sprang up at Rochester, Boston, Watertown, Roxbury, Mystic, Lynn, and Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay, so Boston, Roxbury, Watertown, Mystic, and Lynn. These things you already have remembered. Then, by 1640, religious sectarianism surfaced. So, 1640, the Puritans divided the colonies into sectors. Okay, by 1650, religious sectarianism surfaced, forcing renegades or rebels to abandon Massachusetts to develop Rhode Island, which was chartered in 1644. Okay, 1640 religious sectarianism surfaced. Then come to, that is, others enticed by fantasies of a fabled affluence left for richer hands southward to the west of the Connecticut River. So there is a Connecticut River is also there. So Connecticut River, so enticed by fantasies of fabled affluence left for richer hands. They left for richer hands. Who? The Puritans. Southward to the west of the Connecticut River. Okay, southwards to the west of the Connecticut River. So the here key point is Connecticut River. Okay, the Puritans left for richer hands southward to the west of Connecticut River. So you people mentioned in exam also, they left for richer hands southward to west of the Connecticut River. It's a geographical area mapping was there in your material, so that you will memorize according to the geography. In 1639, certain towns had already adopted the fundamental orders of Connecticut as the colony's constitution. By 1662, a royal charter had been issued that authenticated Connecticut's independent status. The earliest settlements emerged in New Hampshire in 1623. So, the earliest settlements emerged in New Hampshire in 1623. After endless debate between ambitious English agents and Massachusetts authorities, it became by 1680 an autonomous territory of the crown. The status of Maine, which had been settled in 1630s, was troubled likewise until 1691 when it was made part of Massachusetts. So these statements is not very important at long question point of view. So only key points I will dictate and you will note down in your notebook. At the end of the century, New England, as the entire region was named, was a flourishing new enclave within the English Empire. Okay, so here it is: New France, Lake Superior, Ottawa, Huron, Wyandotte, then Lake Ontario. All these names you should remember. Okay, all these names you should remember. Some points you can write from your own mind. Okay, that is, here it is: Cuba, New France, Huron, Wyandotte, Ottawa, Lake Superior, Winnebago, Potawatomi, okay, then Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Haven, New Netherland, New Amsterdam, then New Sweden, okay, Maryland, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga and Seneca. Okay, so already these things in the map. So we will go through the map. Here it is Atlantic Ocean and other areas, that is Florida, Spanish, all these things, Saint Augustine already there. So European settlements and Indian lives in America 1650, the map was there. Then the New England way of life was sharply polarized against the way of life of the Virginians as well as similar materialistically inspired immigrants. Okay, so the New England way of life, how it was changed. Okay, the New England way of life was sharply polarized against the way of life of the Virginians. Sharply polarized against the way of the life of the Virginians, because the New England way of life was different, quite different from Virginians, as well as the similar materialistically inspired immigrants. Okay, the immigrants were materialistically people. Then Virginians aspired to ownership of property either as tobacco farm or as cotton plantation and needed to employ indentured servants and chattel slaves. Okay, and needed to employ indentured servants and chattel slaves. So here servants and slave motive was their main intention, to acquire the trappings of aristocracy. So they want to stay in a aristocratic environment. New Englanders, on the contrary, aimed at the actualization of an Virginians aspired to ownership of property either as tobacco farm or as cotton plantation and needed to employ indentured servants and chattel slaves to acquire the trappings of aristocracy. New Englanders, on the contrary, aimed at the actualization of an ideal. For them, there had been no option but to flee their old England, which was being taken over by Satan. Okay, so for them there had been no option but to flee their old England. So the immigrants from old England had no option. Okay, so they want to again return to their motherland, so which was being taken over by Satan. They considered themselves to be God's special emissaries on a mission into the wilderness, okay, seeking to establish a Jerusalem renewed. So here it is the main key point or main theme. Whereas Puritan concept, they considered themselves to be God's special emissaries. So God's special emissaries or angels, mission into the wilderness, okay, mission into the wilderness, seeking to establish a Jerusalem country. Okay, so seeking to establish a Jerusalem renewed country. This in essence was the Puritan project in America. So these things you will remember, and exam point of view it is important. Okay, exam point of view this line is important. Then come to who are the New England Puritans. I'm sure you know from your study of Indian history that many sects like Buddhism and Jainism sprang up as a protest against the abuses of Brahminical rituals and ceremonies, which they found were devoid of true spiritual change. Already in our MEG 7 or also Indian history, you know all about that. Many sectors like Buddhism and Jainism they protest against the abuses of Brahminical rituals. Okay, Brahminical rituals and ceremonies which they found were devoid of true spiritual change. So their thought or their vision was quite different from Brahminical rituals and ceremonies. Similarly, Puritanism, as Perry Miller has remarked in his classic study on the subject, began as an agitation within the Church of England in the latter half of the 16th century. It was a movement for reform of that institution and as such hardly an alternative denomination to Anglicanism, which was a dominant theology. In the 1530s, the Church of England had broken with the Roman Catholic Church. By the inspection of Elizabeth's I's reign in 1558, it had proceeded a certain distance in this revolt, had become Protestant, had disestablished the monasteries and rectified many papist abuses. Okay, in 1530s, the Church of England had broken with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, Church of England in the latter half of the 16th century, Perry Miller was written in her study or survey report. In 1530s, the Church of England had broken with the Roman Catholic Church. By the inspection of Elizabeth I's reign in 1558, Elizabeth reign in 1558, it had proceeded a certain distance in this revolt. Okay, had become Protestant, had disestablished the monasteries and rectified many papist abuses. Puritanism was the belief that the reforms should be continued, that more abuses remained to be corrected. The practices still survived from the days of papacy, which should be renounced, that the Church of England should be restored to the purity of the first century church as established by Christ himself. So here the church point of view, the Church of England should be restored to the purity of the first century church as established by Christ himself. In the 1560s, when the advocates of purification first acquired the name of Puritans, no one, not even the most radical, knew exactly how far the process was to go or just what the ultimate goal would be. Down to the days of the so-called Puritan Revolution, there was never any agreement on this point, and in the end of this failure of unanimity proved to be the undoing of English Puritanism. Okay, so what was the English Puritanism undoing? Down to the days of the so-called Puritan Revolution, there was never any agreement on this point, and in the end of this failure of unanimity proved to be the undoing of English Puritanism. Many Puritans desired that only certain ceremonies be abolished or changed. Others wanted ministers to preach more sermons, make up their own prayers on the inspiration of the moment rather than read set forms out of a book. Others went further and proposed a revision of the whole Puritanism, of the whole form of ecclesiastical government. Okay, so others went further and proposed a revision of the whole form of ecclesiastical government. Ecclesiastical government means the government which is superficial, or ecclesiastical government. But whatever they said or complexion of their Puritanism, Puritans were those who wanted to continue a movement which was already underway. Their opponents, the Anglicans, were those who felt that with the enthronement of Elizabeth I and with the Elizabethan compromise within the church, things had gone far enough. The Elizabethan Compromise, according to the Anglicans, had adequately eliminated the excess of Roman Catholicism. They wanted to call a halt just where they were and stabilize at that point. So, Elizabethan Compromise, according to the Anglicans, had adequately eliminated the excess of Roman Catholicism. Okay, here it is the main point. The Elizabethan Compromise, according to the Anglicans, had adequately eliminated the excess of Roman Catholicism. They abolished the Roman Catholicism. They wanted to call a halt just where they were and stabilize at that point. Thus, the issue between the two views, though large enough, still involved only a limited number of questions on everything except matters upon which the Puritans wanted further reform. There was essential agreement. The Puritans who opted to go to New England were among the more extreme, though by no means the most extreme that the movement produced. Even before their departure in 1620, they had gone to the lengths of formulating a concrete platform of church organization which they wished to see instituted in England in lieu of the episcopal system. By the 1620, the Puritans had moved the Church of England a long way toward their way of thinking, but then a startling reversal occurred. The new King Charles I, working with those who disagreed with the Puritans, initiated a determined counter-offensive. First, the Anglicans, supported by the monarch, managed to maintain the episcopal system. Second, they sustained the existing infrastructure for devotional services, elegant attire for the priest, glorious objects of gold, colored glass in use during worship, the altar itself treated as a site of almost miraculous significance. So, aristocracy was their main motto. Third, the prayers of the prayer book and the sacraments were venerated by the Anglicans as the center of all worship, especially communion, for it represented the body of Christ. The Puritans were shocked to witness this, what they thought to be retrogressive tendencies within the church, and even more appalled when hundreds of priests who resisted them were dismissed from the pulpits. Like everyone else, Puritans believed that the Church of England was the driving force, the very center of national life. If it were corrupted, chaos itself would descend upon the country. England, the Puritans asserted, was in the anarchic condition. Okay? There was disorder and discord all over. Gambling, whoring, thievery, rape, and murder were routine occurrences. Excessive self-indulgence and self-gratification seemed to have become the norms of the social conduct. They were more selfish. The Puritans articulated the emergent bourgeois ethos which celebrated temperance, caution, thrift, and hard work. They held that God the Father, who must punish even as he protects, who surely not tolerate the sins of his children, and would chastise them by sending down plagues and other disasters. Only when England possessed a fully purified church, the Puritans said, would God cease punishing the English for their sins. The Anglicans pointed out that by law, the king and his officers of the Church of England were entitled to take all decisions in religious matters and insisted that everyone's duty was to obey them, not to grumble or grimace. Okay. So the Anglican pointed out what? The Anglicans pointed out that by law the king and his officers of the Church of England were entitled to take all decision in religious matters. Okay, in religious matters, and insisted that everyone's duty was to obey to them, not to grumble and grimace. Okay, now grumble or grimace means not to oppose them. Then all agitation ought to halt. The Puritans, tenacious and stubborn, refused to oblige. To listen to humans, all agitation ought to halt. The Puritans, tenacious and stubborn, refused to oblige. To listen to humans masquerading as God's minister would be tantamount to bring back to the Church of England that vast suffocating fog of papist superstition and irrationality that the Protestant Reformation was supposed to have swept away. Across the English Channel on the European continent, this was the period when the powerful armies of Roman Catholic monarchs were sweeping from victory to victory as the counter-reformation against Protestantism, launched by the Roman Catholic Church, mounted in enthusiasm. Suspicious Puritans then alleged that what the Anglicans were doing was part of a covert Roman Catholic conspiracy, working through the king and his followers to destroy Protestantism in England. Okay. Then so friends, we will go the last paragraph, that is Catholic Church mounted in enthusiasm. Suspicious Puritans then alleged that what the Anglicans were doing was part of a covert Roman Catholic conspiracy, working through the king and his followers to destroy Protestantism in England. Okay, so Anglicans were doing was part of a covert Roman Catholic conspiracy, working through the king and his followers to destroy Protestantism in England. So you should remember the Anglicans. Okay, here Anglicans protested to destroy the Protestantism in England. This part is your main point. Anglicans were raised their voice to destroy Protestantism in England. Then we will go to the next paragraph. But still more fundamental to their differences was the Anglican and the Puritan argument over the nature of mankind. Okay, but still more fundamental to their differences was the Anglican and the Puritan argument over the nature of mankind. To the Puritanism, human beings in their natural condition are totally depraved. Okay, so what is the Puritans' mentality over Anglicans? Okay, but still more fundamental to their differences was the Anglican and the Puritan argument over the nature of the mankind. They were against the nature of the mankind. Who? The Anglican. Okay, the Puritan. The Anglican and the Puritan argument over the nature of the mankind. To the Puritans, human beings in their natural condition are totally depraved. Okay, to the Puritans, human beings in their natural condition are totally depraved, their reason effectively impaired by their passion. Okay, so they are very passionate about their own being, so they are very selfish. If any are saved, forgiven their sins and going to heaven, it is entirely because of God has willed it, so not because of anything that individual persons may have done on their own. So they told that they were the God gifted person on the earth. If any are saved, forgiven their sins and going to heaven, it is entirely because of God. Okay, so God is the only power which is omnipresent, omniscient, and God is the only power, supreme power. It's not only because of anything that individual person may have done on their own. Okay, the Anglicans recoiled from all this. They believed, of course, that human beings are all sinners, but also that God has made them discriminating creatures. Okay, they believed, of course, that human beings are all sinners. Human beings are all sinners, but also that God has made them discriminating creatures. Human beings are all sinners, but also that God has made them discriminating creatures. So God made them discriminating creatures, but all human beings are sinners. Okay, so this thought was from Anglicans. Ethical choice that they said is the candle of the Lord. Okay, ethical choice, they said, is the candle of the Lord. Thus, to some degree, we have a free will. That is, we do have a role in deciding our personal destinies. So, we do have a role in deciding our personal destinies, and with some degree, we have a free will. So, everybody has a free will. That was Anglicans' thought. The Anglicans believed that if we choose to live in God's way, take the sacraments regularly, and accept the salvation that a benign God has offered to all, we are saved. The Anglicans believe that if we choose to live in God's way, okay, the Anglicans believed that if we choose to live in God's way, take the sacraments regularly. Okay, the Anglicans believe that if we choose to live in God's way, take the sacraments regularly, and accept the salvation that a benign God has offered to all, we are saved. These are Anglican thoughts. So, here it is the main point. The Anglican believed that if we choose to live in God's way, okay, God's way, take the sacraments regularly. Sacraments means the teachings of the gods. Okay, the sacraments, that is teachings of the gods regularly, then, and accept the salvation that a benign God has offered to all. What do you mean by benign? Benign means it's a good thing. Okay, benign means it's a good thing. Okay, benign God. Benign God means it's a good thing for people that God has offered to all, and we are saved. Okay, so the important thing was not so much that faith we had, but how we treated each other. Certainly, we must love God as the first table of the 10 Commandments decreed. But equally important were some other questions. Are we loving to each other, obedient and dutiful to appropriate worldly authority? Okay, are we loving to each other? So, these are some questions of oneself. Okay, obedient and dutiful to appropriate worldly authority, and mindful of good works. These were what the last 6 of the 10 commandments the second table called for, and it was here that Anglicans laid their stress. So these are Anglican thought, and the Anglicans laid their stress. The Puritans emphasized upon the first 4 of the 10 commandments, the first table, which ordered humanity to revere God and to glorify Him, and to have no other thing or person in their lives before Him. The dilemma was that human beings were so naturally rotten, their passions so predominant upon their reason, that every instinct and inclination turned them away from God. So what does mean the line? What does it mean? The dilemma was that human beings were so naturally rotten. Okay, human beings are so naturally rotten. Rotten means poisoned. Okay, their passion so predominant upon their reason. They are so passionate, but without reason, that every instinct and inclination turned them away from God. They are going to very selfish. Okay, so that their inclination and instinct turn them away from God. They choose evil unknowingly. Okay, and knowingly also. They choose evil knowingly. Okay, so knowingly they choose evil. Evil means bad things, such as murder, adultery, or theft, any other things. They choose evil knowingly. Do we all then go to hell? So hell and heaven, two parts of that is human psychology. Do we well then go to hell? No, the Puritans believed that God, for reasons known only to Him, had decided to save some humanity from the everlasting torture. Okay, the Puritans believed that God, for reasons known only to Him, God, for reasons known only to Him, had decided to save some of humanity from that everlasting torture. Had decided to save some of humanity from that everlasting torture. The Puritans believed that God, for reasons known only to Him, had decided to save some of humanity from that everlasting torture. Okay, God for reasons only to him decided some of humanity. So Puritans wanted to save some humanity from the everlasting torture. He had sent Jesus Christ to save these persons who are the elect from all eternity. Okay, he had sent Jesus Christ to save these persons. These are Puritans' thought, who are the elect from all the eternity. In the course of their lives, after painstaking, prayerful, and prolonged inner studies, they suddenly learn that they are indeed saved. In that overwhelming moment, the old sinful person within, that is Adam, dies, and a new sinless person, that is Christ, is born. Thereafter, the person so saved will by divine grace live virtuous and inviolate lives, clearly designed to bear witness to the grandeur of God. Okay, in the overwhelming moment of the old sinful person within, the Adam dies. So Adam was the most sinful person. When Adam dies, a new sinless person, Christ, is born. So Jesus Christ is born after Adam dies. Thereafter, the person so saved will by divine grace. So, according to Christ, though he was a divine blessings to the earth, therefore the person so saved will by divine grace live virtuous and inviolate lives. Live virtuous and inviolate lives. Clearly designed to bear witness to the grandeur of God. Clearly designed to bear witness, okay, to the grandeur of God. Their redefined enterprise is to do God's work on earth unceasingly in remarking and reviving this world. Their redefining enterprise to do God's work on earth. So they were redefined enterprise. Who were redefined enterprise? The Puritans. Was the God's? They were redefined enterprise is to do God's work on earth, unceasingly in remarking and reviving this world. Okay, they must erect a rejuvenate Jerusalem and not be deterred by existing tarnished edicts and customs. So they were deprived of any customs or rituals. Okay, so prolonged customs and rituals they denied to perform. They must erect a rejuvenated Jerusalem and not be deterred by existing tarnished edicts and old customs. Okay, so they must erect a rejuvenated Jerusalem. So here Jerusalem is the main key point. You will remember that is the Puritan concept, Jerusalem. They want to spread Jerusalem concept over the America. They had a covenant with God in which salvation has been granted to them without riders, but with a clear obligation to live thereafter a principled and committed life. Okay, they had a covenant with God in which salvation has been granted to them without riders, but with a clear obligation to live thereafter a principled and committed life. Principled and committed life they demanded. Okay, and they ensured also. Then come to 1.3, the New England Puritans as they saw themselves and their mission in America. So here it is very much important. We will study the New England Puritans as they saw themselves and their mission in America. When Puritan John Winthrop's fleet led the Great Puritan migration from England to Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, it was in pursuit of a utopian goal. So what was a utopian goal? When Puritan John Winthrop's fleet led, okay, when Puritan John Winthrop's, here you will remember the name, the Puritan John Winthrop's, okay, the Puritan John Winthrop's fleet led the Great Puritan migration from England to Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Okay, when Puritan John Winthrop's fleet led the Great Puritan migration from England to Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, it was in pursuit of a utopian goal to found in the New England, New World a utopia that would serve as an example to the old world. They were not escaping from England. They were on an errand into the wilderness. Okay? They were not escaping from England. They were on an errand into the wilderness. For we must consider, said Winthrop. Okay? For we must consider, said Winthrop, who would later become the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. Here you can see the spelling of eyes, we, okay, W-E-V. This is the Old English, okay. So Old English, the Winthrop said, for we must consider, said Winthrop, who would later become the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. Who will be the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony? Winthrop said at that time that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. So we will be on city upon a hill. Then the eyes of all people are upon us. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. So that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. Okay? We shall be made a story and a byword through the world. Therefore, let us choose life that we and our seed may live by obeying his voice and cleaving to him, for he is our life and our prosperity. John Winthrop, A Model of Christian Charity, 1630. Okay, this is John Winthrop who tell this. Here it is a picture of New England, you can see. Then come to Winthrop's utopian goal. Okay, Winthrop's utopian goal, of course, was supremely unconcerned with those who already lived in America. North America was a vast continent occupied for many thousands of years by, according to recent estimates, perhaps 10 to 12 million Native Americans north to Rio Grande. Okay, so North America was a vast continent occupied many thousands of years by million Native Americans north of Rio Grande. Okay, American Native were Rio Grande. Okay, at that time American north to Rio Grande. Okay, then how could the Puritans make a lasting breezehead among so numerous a people? Already in 1616, English fishermen visiting New England had brought the European disease bacilli, which assuming epidemic proportions. Okay, how could the Puritans make a lasting breezehead among so numerous a people? Already in 1616, English fishermen visiting New England had brought the European disease. Okay, 1616, English fishermen visiting New England had brought the European disease bacilli, which assuming epidemic proportions, okay, had annihilated probably half of the Indians of New England, who had numbered 25,000. Their bones and skulls, an Englishman wrote, made such a spectacle, it seemed to me a new found Golgotha. Okay, so mean name new found Golgotha, that is the New England, and brought the European disease bacilli. 1616, that is the new disease was found in America, that is New England, had brought the European disease bacilli. So English fishermen visiting New England had brought the European disease bacilli, which assuming epidemic proportions and annihilated probably all of the Indians of New England, who had numbered 25,000. Their bones and skulls, an Englishman wrote, made such a spectacle, it seemed to me a newfound Golgotha. Rather than regard this event as a tragic human disaster, the English in general looked upon it as a proof of God's wishes. Okay, so rather than regard this event as a tragic human disaster, the English in general looked upon it as proof of God's wishes, that the land be made empty for them. And then came a second devastation, smallpox, shortly after the Puritans' arrival, which in the early 1630s killed thousands of more Indians. So, rather in this regard, the event was a tragic human disaster. The bacilli disease was epidemic, and it was caused, and it was already in 1616. The English fishermen visiting New England brought the European disease bacilli, and it is an epidemic proportion. Rather than in this regard, the event as a tragic human disaster, the English in generally looked upon it as a proof of God's wishes, and that the land may empty for them. Land be made empty for them. And then came a second devastation, smallpox. Shortly after the Puritans' arrival, which in the early 1630s killed thousands of more Indians. So thus, in a short span of time, the Puritans' arrival, which in the early 1630s killed thousands of more Indians. What had happened over the past century in Mexico, where a population of perhaps 25 million had shrunk to less than 1/12 that number, was occurring around the Puritans as well. What had happened over the past century in Mexico, where a population of perhaps 25 million had shrunk to less than 1/12 that number, was occurring around the Puritans as well. Okay, the epidemic was revealed in 1630s, and the smallpox. So many of the people was died after Puritans' arrival. The weakened local Indians therefore made room for the Puritans with not much resistance, and the Puritans in turn stated that since the land was not occupied or claimed, it could be rightfully taken. So Puritans occupied and claimed that land in which the Red Indians were living. So besides, the English said they were a civilized people, and the Indians enclosed no land. Besides, the English said they were a civilized people, and the Indians enclose no land, neither have any settled habitation, nor any time cattle to improve the land by. So the Puritans simply moved in and established their settlements. Later they made purchases of great tracts from the Indians, but only to establish a legal title to the land, so that the Dutch of the New Amsterdam, later newer city, could not. Okay, so later they made purchase of great tracts from the Indians, but only to establish a legal title. Okay, but only to establish a legal title. Later they made purchase of great tracts from the Indians, but only to establish a legal title to the land, so that the Dutch of the New Amsterdam, later newer city, could not. Okay, they are legally taken that land. Okay, purchase of great tracts. Okay, from the Indians they purchased the great tracts, so that the Dutch of the New Amsterdam could not. There was much talk among the Puritans that they could Christianize the Indian, and the small groups of praying Indians were eventually formed into villages nearby. But unlike the Spanish who came before them, the Puritans did not bring with them great armies of missionaries to spread out among the Indians, but only enough ministers to meet the Puritans' own needs. Okay, unlike the Spanish who came before them, so Spanish came before the Puritans. The Puritans did not bring with them great armies of missionaries. Okay, the Puritans did not bring with them great armies of missionaries to spread out among the Indians, but only enough ministers. They only had the ministers to meet the Puritans' own need. The authorities of Massachusetts Bay Colony declared that the Indians in their region were subject to the laws of the colony and tried to control their moral behavior. The authorities of Massachusetts Bay Colony declared that the Indians in their region were subject to the laws of the colony. Okay, and tried to control their moral behavior. So the authorities of Massachusetts Bay what decided? That they declared that the Indians in their region were subject to the laws of the colony. Okay, so Indians in their region were subject to the laws of the colony. The Massachusetts Bay Colony law was applied to them and tried to control their moral behavior. This, however, quickly brought them into conflict with the Pequots. Okay, this, however, quickly brought them into conflict with the Pequots, a strong and sturdy Indian tribe. Okay, so there were a strong and sturdy Indian tribe was there. So the tribe's name was Pequots. Okay, and led them to the Pequot War of 1637. There is a Pequot War was in 1637, during which the tribe was almost obliterated. Okay, during which almost all tribe was obliterated. After that, for nearly 40 years there was peace. And earlier in Virginia, so now in England, Indians and Puritans remained biologically separate and more or less in their own separate enclaves. Then come to 1.4. The emergence of Puritanism as the hegemonic American ideology. The historian Francis Jennings has rightly written about the Puritan migration into America that the so-called settlement of America was a resettlement, a reoccupation of her land made waste by the diseases and demoralization introduced by the newcomers. Okay, the historian Francis Jennings has rightly written about the Puritans' migration into America that the so-called settlement of America was a resettlement, a reoccupation of a land made waste by the diseases and demoralization introduced by the newcomers. The historian Francis Jennings was rightly written about the Puritan migration into America. The historian Francis Jennings has rightly written about the Puritan migration into America. So, who was rightly written about the Puritan migration into America? The historian Francis Jennings. So-called settlement of America was a resettlement, a reoccupation of a land made waste by the diseases and demoralization introduced by the newcomers. The obliteration of old cultures of the New World by the new entrants from the Old World only partially explains, however, the emergence of Puritanism as the hegemonic American ideology. The Puritans were extremely self-conscious emigres. Already I have told you the Puritans were extremely self-conscious emigres who made a fetish of recording their experiences in the New World even as they were undergoing the experiences. John Winthrop was certainly not the only Puritan to write a journal, noting in detail the day-to-day episodes of his adventures on alien shores. The ability to write, indeed, was supposed to be the mark of the civilization of the European traveler. Correspondingly, from the European point of view, the unlettered Aboriginals, the Indians and slaves, the Africans brought in as chattel labor a little later, were either written down in or written out of the Puritan narratives. Okay, only the John Winthrop was not the writer, but many European traveler, they unlettered Aboriginals, the Indians, the slaves, the African brought in as a chattel labor. So they all Puritan narratives were written at that time. Then consider for instance the following account of Puritan raid on Pequot village, extracted from William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation, written in 1630-46, published in 1857. So consider for instance the following account of Puritan raid on Pequot village. Already I have told you Pequot had stirred at very wild tribe of America, that is Puritan raid on Pequot village, extracted from William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation. Okay, so William Bradford wrote the Plymouth Plantation. Here it is the main key point you should remember at the exam point of view. The William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation, written in 1630-46, published 1857. 57. Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others hewn through with their rapiers, so as they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in their fire, and the steams of blood quenching the same, and horrible was the stink and scent thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers therefore to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them, thus to enclose their enemies in their hands, and give them so speedy a victory over so proud and insulting an enemy. So, you just remember these lines, but it is not that much important. Only one sentence you will remember. It was a fearful sight. Okay, so it was a fearful sight to see him thus frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching. Streams of blood quenching was there, and victory seemed a sweet sacrifice. Okay, then it is clear that Bradford applauds the slaying of the Indians despite his protestation about the sordidness of the event. The Puritan theologian Cotton Mather is much more candid than Governor Bradford in his approval of the genocide. Okay, genocide means murder of the individuals or murder of people. The Puritan theologian Cotton Mather is much more candid than Governor Bradford in his approval of the genocide. It was supposed that no less than 600 procured souls were brought down to hell that day. Then, Bradford's narrative is no ordinary piece of writing, meant to be a memoir of his own American odyssey. This tract, by the most illustrious administrator of the colony of Plymouth, transforms itself soon into cultural propaganda from contemporary New England. Then two motives flow with each other through the nest. The first motive is that America was utterly savage in the state of the Puritans encountered it. It was virtually uninhabitable and by extension uninhabited. The second is that whatever it was and whatever it was to become, America had nothing to do with Europe. Okay, America had nothing to do with Europe. America, in other words, was to become what the Puritans wished it to become. So the first motive was that America was utterly savage in the state of the Puritans encountered it, and the second motive is that America, in other words, was to become what the Puritans wished it to become. Before the Puritans, writes Bradford, lay a wild landscape such as no civilized people had ever encountered, and if they looked behind them, there was the mighty ocean which they passed, and was now a main bar and gulf to separate them from all the civil parts of the world. Not even the ship lying at anchor qualifies this absolute separation, for the captain daily threatens to leave. Okay, the captain daily threatens to leave. Okay, so ship captains already daily threatens to leave the people. May not and ought not the children of these fathers, Bradford instructs his first readers, who are just these children, rightly say, our fathers were Englishmen, which came over his great ocean, and were ready to perish in the wilderness. But they cried unto the Lord, and he heard their voice, and looked on their adversity. Okay, great ocean, and were ready to perish in the wilderness. But they cried unto the Lord, and he heard their voice, and looked on their adversity. And he heard their voice and looked on their adversity. The Puritans are certainly in need of the Lord's support, as their plight is worse than that of the apostle and his shipwrecked company. Okay, the Puritans are certainly in need of the Lord's support, as their plight is worse and than that of the apostle and his shipwrecked company, to whom the barbarians showed no small kindness in refreshing them. Barbarian means no kindness. The savages the Puritans met were readier to fill their sides full of arrows than otherwise. Bradford's chronicle distinguishes itself from other early American texts by featuring natives who are ferociously against the whites. Okay, so Bradford's chronicle says or distinguishes itself from other early American texts by featuring natives who were ferociously against the whites. A Plymouth plantation, as Bradford's call to the children of the father makes explicit, consciously invents a historical tradition. So Bradmouth's writings was the Plymouth plantation, in which he wrote or called to the children of the fathers makes explicit, consciously invents a historical tradition. To quote Myra Jelen, it proposes it proposes some fundamental terms for organizing the experience of colonization. To quote Myra Jelen, it proposes some fundamental terms for organizing the experience of colonization. The most important of these terms are redefinitions of wilderness and civilization and the opposition between them. On the one hand, the wilderness is without trace of any cultivation. On the other hand, precisely in its untouched character, it is the site of a potential exceptional construction. Simultaneously, civilization in Bradford's account acquires a strange ambiguity. Okay? The civilization left forever by the Puritans is suggestive of great accomplishments, no doubt, but it is also an abode of destructive viciousness. Okay? The Puritans did some good things for America, but it is also an abode of destructive viciousness. The final impression that Bradford's book leaves on the reader about the apparent polarities of civilization and wilderness is not one of contrast. The situations curiously resemble one another. Okay, they are like mirror images rather than like antithetical antithetical emblems. Okay, they are like mirror images then like antithetical emblems. The final impression of Bradford's book leaves on the reader about the apparent polarities of civilization and wilderness. Okay, so what does Bradford's book leaves on reader? The Bradford book leaves on the reader about the apparent polarities of civilization and wilderness. Okay, then, when the Puritans step on to the New World to face its searing inhospitality, they leave behind not an antithetical good but another kind of evil. So, the Puritans, when entered the New World to face its searing inhospitality, they leave behind not an antithetical good but another kind of evil, and the complaint that there were no towns, inns, or houses in the New World measures their problem without advancing a solution. The solution is still to be engendered, and the rest of the book describes each undertaking, whether the building of accommodation or the enactment of laws as from scratch. Okay, the solution is still to be engendered, and the rest of the book describes each undertaking, whether the building of accommodation or the enactment of laws as from scratch. All in all, the Puritan elite repeatedly asserted that their endeavor in founding America, inscribed in their numerous chronicles, such as Bradford's, coupled with the lack of any similarly scripted and detailed claims from other groups who inhabited America already during or before the Puritan arrival, made Puritanism emerge as the hegemonic American ideology. America, inscribed in their numerous chronicles, coupled with a lack of very similarly scripted and detailed claims from other groups who inhabited America already during or before the Puritan arrival, made Puritanism emerge as the hegemonic American ideology. Then let us sum up. In this unit, I have tried to explain the circumstances under which the Puritans migrated from Europe to America and how, in this process, they created the context for the emergence of a new American culture and literature. starts from the writings of some eminent early Puritan migrants to the New World from the Old World, that is already I have discussed, and the Picot movements already I have discussed. Okay, then Bradford and Winthrop's collections of writings are already discussed. Feature included in the unit indicate the Puritans thought that they and they alone were the founders of American civilization, notwithstanding the inhabitants of the territory before or after. Over the centuries, the Puritan view came to be accepted as the dominant view of American history. So here are the questions in 1.6. Who were the first settlers from Europe in the American continent? What were their motives for trying to settle in America? How were the Puritans different from the first European settlers in America? What are their reasons for emigration? Why did Puritanism emerge as the hegemonic American ideology in the course of less than a century? Okay, so here are the suggested readings. Already I have discussed the unit 1. So the key points, the unit 1 concepts already discussed. Here we will remember the Bradford, the name of Bradford. Okay, the name of Bradford, and another writing was there. Another writing. Here it is the John Winthrop. Okay, Bradford and John Winthrop is the main key points. So John Winthrop and Bradford writing was there, and Picot movement. Okay, so these are the main 3 important key points in this chapter. So please like, share and subscribe my channel, and keep watching the video till the end. You will get more notification if you push the bell icon on side of my channel. Thank you viewers.